What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. So much to get to today. Of course, we're going to start with Champions League action, but then we also have a U.S. men's national team roster to discuss. Greg Berhalter talked to the media. I was in that press conference after that squad got released earlier today for these two final tune-up games before the World Cup that will take place at the end of this month. So I'm going to give my thoughts on that as well as some of Greg Berhalter's reaction and what he said and sort of his explanation for why this roster ended up the way it did. But like I said, we're going to start with Champions League before we get into the U.S. men's national team. And your highlight game of match day 2 in the Champions League, Bayern Munich get the 2-0 win over Barcelona. Robert Lewandowski goes back to Bayern, and in a really cruel twist of fate for him, the storyline coming out of this game more than anything else is his missed chances, which is just completely uncharacteristic. I firmly believe he is the best pure goal scorer in the world and has been for a while now. And Barcelona were terrific in the first half. Unsurprisingly, he was on the receiving end of most of the chances they created. He had 2, 3 really good looks and just couldn't convert them. Maybe the nerves had something to do with it and the awkwardness of playing Bayern so quickly after he left. It also might have just been one of those games. But the reality is, at halftime, Lewandowski should have had at least one goal, if not two. They were that good, they deserved those goals, and he should have finished the chances that were created. Barcelona, not as convincing after halftime, don't pose quite as much of a threat. But it's still never like Bayern got complete control of this game, or that you really felt like Bayern were imposing their will at basically any point, at least until the goals were scored. And so Lucas Hernandez opens the scoring off of a set piece. You got to do better marking him there. But again, in terms of a run of play and a sort of controlling the game standpoint, Bayern still really struggle, but they find a way to get this goal. Things change a little bit after that. Bayern were better in the second half. And they get their one moment in transition. Terrific build-up on the right side between Nassar Mujwawi, Jamal Musiala, Leroy Sané. There might have been one other player involved in there. And ultimately, it's Musiala who carries the ball forward. He lays it off to Sané, who finishes really, really well to make it 2-0. And Bayern just kind of coasted more or less from there. It never felt like Barcelona were going to get that goal and get themselves back into this game. It really felt like they had to take those chances in the first half. They didn't, and that was kind of that. Which leaves you in a really interesting place in terms of what to take away from this game. Because on one hand, I am still incredibly concerned about Bayern's ceiling. I talked about this after the third straight draw in the Bundesliga. You winning at Inter with what is happening at Inter right now is not doing anything to change my mind. And this performance didn't do anything to change my mind either. I am just not convinced they can get past the quarterfinals. When they go up against the 5 or so best teams in the world over 2 legs, I'm not convinced they can get the job done. And I also would be surprised, maybe even shocked, if Robert Lewandowski has another game like this season. Barcelona need to do it for 90 minutes, not 45. But I would not be scared if I'm Barcelona about the idea of, and of course it would take an extreme set of circumstances for a rematch to happen in the knockout stage because they're in the same group, but playing a team on Bayern's level, Barcelona are there. This team is ready to compete with at least those tier 2 teams. What I still want to find out, and what we're not going to learn for at least a little while, is can they hang with PSG? Can they hang with Manchester City? Can they hang with Real Madrid? But so far, after that really disappointing opening game, they have been fantastic. And I would argue everything they were supposed to be based on the money that was spent and the strategy that is being implemented to try and get this team out of their catastrophic financial situation. So you walk away from this game not concerned at all about status in the Champions League and getting out of this group. That's the most difficult game you're going to play. Bayern handled Inter on the road, no problem. I expect Barcelona to do the exact same thing. So you get your rematch with Bayern, you still can win this group, you certainly are still in a position to finish second. So it is really kind of strange how this all played out. And the final thing I'll say is, if you're going to pick a game for Robert Lewandowski to be that wasteful, this is a pretty good one. Like I said, no severe consequences Champions League group stage wise. And where you really don't want this to happen is in the knockout stage, right? In a quarterfinal, in a semifinal, where that kind of result can end up ending your Champions League run. Ask Ajax. That was hard to say. How that went last year, right? You just get unlucky in the wrong game. It's what makes this tournament so spectacular. So if you get that out of your system in this game, where just expectations aren't that high, it would have been terrific if you won, but there really aren't that many consequences for losing. You're going to take all of this if you're Xavi. You've got to feel really good. Big win for Bayern to just kind of get back on track. But still, over 90 minutes, I'm just not convinced they can play with these top 5 or so teams in the world. Then we go to the other high-profile matchup on Tuesday, Liverpool, Ajax. First thing that needs to be recognized here, Thiago got back in the starting lineup, and boy, did it make a difference. And then Mo Salah got on the score sheet to break the deadlock and get Liverpool a lead in this game. And those two things are incredibly important. One, it has become abundantly evident how important Thiago is to this team. You can talk about whether they should have reinforced that midfield more in the transfer window. I still think not enough credence is being given to the other midfield injuries they've dealt with. But the reality is they don't have somebody to make up for not having Thiago. And you saw it in this game. And Mo Salah has gotten off to a really slow, disappointing start. And so getting him that goal, also really, really positive. And the performance as a whole was really good. They outshot Ajax 24-3. And StatsBomb, which is the source FB Ref uses for their expected goals, has this game at 2.4 to 0.3 in favor of Liverpool in terms of expected goals. They were dominant. And still, Joel Matip needed to save them at the end from having an unlucky game they couldn't afford. Right? Sometimes you just can't put the ball in the net as many times as you deserve to. That in itself is not concerning to me. There are so many positives to take away from this performance. But the reality of the situation is this game was going to go, I would argue, maybe even 90% of the way in determining Liverpool's Champions League fate this season. Maybe that's a slight stretch, but it's not that far off. And I say that because of just how different the outlook is based on the result of this game. Right? If Liverpool don't get that second goal, and it's a draw, you are now having to catch up to both Napoli and Ajax, and you still have to go to Amsterdam in a world where you're assuming Ajax is going to be the second team in this group and that Napoli is going to win. Not impossible, but you've got no margin for error at that point, right? You can't drop points against Rangers. You've got to win your home game against Napoli, things like that. And obviously, if you lost this game, it would be an even worse situation. But now, because they found a way to win, which they absolutely deserve to, you have put the pressure back on Ajax in terms of this group. Napoli did what they were supposed to. James Sands got a red card for Rangers. So Napoli are flying 6 points through 2 games. And so now, Liverpool get Rangers twice still, where you know there are going to be points dropped between Ajax and Napoli when they play these 2 games. And you still get Napoli at home. And all of a sudden, this looks much more manageable. This is what you would expect in an incredibly well-balanced group with 3 really, really good teams. It's by no means a guarantee Liverpool is going through. But I would argue now, Ajax is the team that has to deliver rather than Liverpool. Right? If they drop points at home against Liverpool, they're in big trouble. They drop points against Rangers, they're in big trouble. If they don't get anything away from these 2 games against Napoli, they're in big trouble. That is how dramatically this group shifted because of the single goal Joe Matip scored. We've seen, Liverpool had the 9-0 in the middle of all of these struggles and then went right back to getting blown out by Napoli and looking horrible. So I don't know what this means going forward, to be quite frank. I'm not willing to extrapolate because they've been so inconsistent and just kind of head-scratching at times. But there is something to point to say this is the beginning of a much better run from Liverpool, and that is Thiago is back, and he's in the starting lineup, and he's playing well. This was a very, very, very positive thing. If you're a Liverpool fan, if you're Jurgen Klopp, you've got to feel really good about this. They needed this win. They showed up, absolutely deserved to get it. It was a little more stressful than it should have been based on the balance of play, but in the end, they get it done, and now Champions League looks quite different for them as well as for Ajax. Third game I want to talk about here individually before we get into some bigger takeaways after the break. Manchester City, Borussia Dortmund. This was your highest profile game on Wednesday, and of course features Erling Haaland against his former team. Not the prettiest game you're ever going to see. And ultimately, this is a Manchester City win. But I want to focus more on what actually happened in this game and what it could mean for Borussia Dortmund moving forward. Because whether Manchester City lost, drew, or won this game, they're going to go to the knockout stage. And they're going to be the favorites, probably, heading into the knockout. When you get to the round of 16, the consequences are not severe here. Ultimately, they do get the win. But Borussia Dortmund held Manchester City to 3 shots on target. One of them came from Julian Alvarez, who came on for the last half hour or so, I think it was. So he played a decent amount of minutes, but the point being, one of those shots on target came from a substitute. The other 2 were John Stones' ridiculous rocket out of nowhere to equalize, and Erling Haaland's incredible winner. Those were the 3 shots on goal Manchester City had in this game. I can't tell you the last time I've seen a defensive performance from Borussia Dortmund like that. What they were able to do for 70, 75 minutes in this game, and really all 90, they gave up 2 incredible goals. We'll get to the goals in a second, but there's really nothing you can do about either of them, probably. This is the first evidence I've been able to point to as to why I still think they have a chance to win the Bundesliga with how much Bayern are struggling. I'm not convinced they can do this enough to actually win, but that team that showed up in Manchester can give Bayern a run for their money. That defensive unit was so much better. There was no chaos back there. They weren't giving up big chance after big chance. There weren't players running free. It was a terrific defensive performance. And then Jude Bellingham, kind of a fortunate series of events, but great reaction to just get that ball redirected, and all of a sudden you're winning. And then John Stones does, well, non-John Stones-like things and scores the goal of his life, which then sets the stage for what Erling Haaland did. Now, if you want to poke a hole in Dortmund's defense, yeah, you probably should get out to João Cancelo. It's easy for that cross to get lost because of what Haaland did. But he put that ball in there with the outside of his foot, and it was gorgeous. However, he put that ball in the middle of the three Dortmund center backs that were at that point on the field. And Haaland found a way to get to it and to put it on target. I mean, this guy is... I've been saying this from the very beginning. He's remarkable. I've never seen a player who defies physics the way he does. It just doesn't make sense that somebody his size can do the things he can do. But he is that fast. He is that physically gifted. He is that flexible. All of those things. And so I come away feeling really good about Dortmund. But at the same time, this is a Dortmund team that just got ripped apart by Leipzig, so you got to do it at week in and week out, and that's always been their problem. And it's been the problem so far this season. On Manchester City's side, the only thing I want to add here is this game was played at a level and sort of had the feel of a quarterfinal or a semifinal or something. Not a lot of chances. Two teams that are absolutely capable of getting that far in the tournament. Not a lot between them. Small margins. Right? These are the kind of games Manchester City sometimes have really struggled in. And the criticism always comes when plan A doesn't work, when they don't have control, and Dortmund are one of those teams that thrives in chaos. And so it's not sort of this clinical, systematic game that Pep wants to play. Right? That is where you've seen Manchester City come up short in the Champions League. And this game does not guarantee anything moving forward, obviously. But I said this in the preview, and I will continue to harp on it, and it will be the reason, barring something unforeseen, I will pick Manchester City to win this competition this season. It's because Erling Haaland can do that. Right? He wasn't really involved in the game. He doesn't need to be. They weren't creating an awful lot. It was just kind of blah. But that one moment from João Cancelo and then from Erling Haaland, there's not another team in the world, there's probably not another two players in the world that can combine for a goal like that. But Manchester City has a plan B. It has nothing to do with tactics, nothing to do with Pep changing his approach. It is simply they have a striker who can do that. And that reality could make all the difference in the world on those few occasions and that one matchup where things just aren't clicking and they can't sort of systematically break a team down. That one barrier they need to get over to actually win this tournament. If Erling Haaland can do what he did in this game at that moment, that could be the missing ingredient for this team. Because I will not continue to say or continue to pick this team to win this tournament when the evidence suggests what they have had in the past is not enough. The way they're playing is not enough to actually win the whole thing. I talk about this all the time. For me to believe something's going to change, I need to have something different to point to. Erling Haaland is more than enough different for me to point to. So I'm going to ride this Manchester City team unless they give me reason not to. And I don't expect that to happen.